Hello students, welcome to the class of Edunguru. I am Professor Sunil Kumar Vishwakarma, your biology faculty for the day. What we need to understand here, please try and understand. We are talking about one of the most important purpose of life. Our life is totally a waste if we are not able to produce a new one of our own kind. Because if there is nobody after you who will continue your race, who will continue the gene, and who will continue your legacy. So by this question, you have definitely understood what I am talking about. I am talking about one and only the important goal of all living organisms, no matter who they are, the dogs, the cats, the lions, the tigers, the humans, even the plants. The purpose and the goal of the life is only one, is to reproduce. Because when we talk about biology, it simply says it is the story of life on earth. And if you want more life to come, the process has to continue. And the process is reproduction. As the name suggests, it is reproduction. It means you are producing new one again. So, we start with a very simple definition of reproduction. What is exactly reproduction? It is defined as the process of giving birth to young ones of its own kind. Of its own kind simply says that if you are human, you are supposed to give birth to human. If you are a dog, you are supposed to give birth to pups. It means of its own kind. There can be one more definition for reproduction. What it says? The process of formation of life from pre-existing life. It means if you want a life to come, there has to be one life before you. So that is what is reproduction all about. Now when we talk about lifespan, the lifespan varies with respect to each and every organism available on this earth. But the question is, does the lifespan is somewhere related to the size of the animal? Yes, Rinki, what do you think? The size of the whale is huge and the size of parrot is very small. So what do you think, who will live longer, the parrot or the whale? Yes? Whale. Why? Because it is big and huge? No. The size never decides the lifespan. When I talk about whale, it lives for on an average you can say 37 years or 40 years. But when I talk about parrot, they live for 140 years. Shocked? Yes. Size doesn't matter as far as the lifespan is concerned. Now, when we talk about reproduction, we need to understand that no one is immortal on this earth. But this question is not exactly correct. Why? Because when we talk about unicellular organisms, they are immortal. Why? Because if you talk about amoeba, when they divide, what happens? One parent cell splits into two. The parent cell is gone, vanished. Where is the parent cell? It has formed a daughter cell. It means the unicellular organisms can be termed as immortal. But the problem is their original parent has lost his existence. Now, when we talk about reproduction and its types, there are two major types of reproduction. One is called as asexual reproduction and the other one is sexual reproduction. But before starting with the actual difference between the sexual and the asexual reproduction, what we need to understand, what do you mean by the word sex? When I use the word sex, it is somewhere in our mind a wrong concept. But in one single line, if I define what is sex, it is purely male or female. This is what is sex. Because in your school, when you get your calendar, you get a column of sex. What do you write in that? Male or female? That is what is sex all about. When I talk about asexual reproduction and a sexual reproduction, we need to put it in a distinguished way so that we can understand exactly what it stands for. When I talk about asexual reproduction, the first point is the reproduction which takes place by only one parent. It means only one parent is involved in it. But when I talk about sexual reproduction, I need to say that there are two parents involved, one male and one female. When I talk about asexual reproduction, we need to understand that it is a very fast process, very fast. But when I talk about sexual reproduction, it is a very slow process. It takes more time as compared to asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, there is no fusion of male and female gametes. But in sexual reproduction, there is a fusion of male and female gametes. When I talk about asexual reproduction, no gametes involved at all, no fusion, it simply means there is no variation. No variations produced in case of asexual reproduction. But in sexual reproduction, there will be variation. We all are product of sexual reproduction. As a result, we don't even exactly look like our father and mother who has given birth to us. It is all purely because of variation. So the next point says what? In asexual reproduction, all the organisms produced, they look same. And since they look same, we use one word for it called as clone. So all the organisms are clones. But when I talk about sexual reproduction, all these organisms which are produced, they are different from each other. They show variation. They are called as offsprings. What we need to understand next is asexual reproduction involves only mitosis. You all know mitosis is equational division, which takes place in somatic cells or the body cells, in which the daughter cells form, they contain same number of chromosomes. Very simple. But when I talk about sexual reproduction, we need to understand it involves both mitosis and meiosis. But first will be meiosis, that will lead to formation of gametes. What is meiosis? Reductional division. What happens in this? In this, the daughter cells formed, they contain exactly half number of chromosome as that of parent cell. When I talk about asexual reproduction, you need to understand that here large number of organisms are produced. But when you talk about sexual reproduction, the organisms produced are very less in number in comparison to asexual. Asexual reproduction is also called as agamogeny, or it is also called as agamogenesis. A simply means without, gamo is for gamete, genesis is formation, so there is no gamete formation. And for sexual reproduction, what I need to say, it is also termed as gamogeny or gamogenesis. When we talk about asexual reproduction, it is also termed as apomixis. What is apo? Apo simply means without. Mixis is mixing. So I can say there is no mixing of male and female gametes. But when I focus on sexual reproduction, I need to say that it is called as amphimixis. What is amphi? Have you heard about amphibians? All those animals that live in water as well as on land, they are amphibians, showing two things. So here we say amphimixis means there is a mixing of two, the male gametes and the female gamete. What we need to understand here, that asexual reproduction are of different types, and most of the time asexual reproduction also takes place to survive under unfavorable condition. Like for example, I put one simple example of asexual reproduction, that is binary fission. When we talk about binary fission, one common example that comes in our mind, yes Zubair, can you think of binary fission? Which example? Right from 8th standard, 9th standard, 10th standard you have been studying binary fission. Which example comes in your mind?
Sir, amoeba.
Very good, it's amoeba. The amoeba shows binary fission. What exactly happens in binary fission? So, in order to understand binary fission, take a look at the screen. What happens in binary fission? Let us assume amoeba, when it undergoes binary fission, what happens? The cell membrane stretches. Along with this, the nucleus also stretches, due to which what happens, there is a constriction from both the sides, and when there is constriction from both the end, the middle part becomes almost narrow, the nucleus divides and two daughter amoeba is formed. So this is what is binary fission, a type of asexual reproduction. But there are other types of fission also. There is a lateral fission where the organism divides from the center, the lateral one. There is a longitudinal fission. There is multiple fission. When I talk about multiple fission, it is observed in case of plasmodium. The plasmodium enters in the cell, it divides inside the cell, and finally it bursts out to reproduce again. So that lots of plasmodium coming out is one of the example of multiple fission. What we need to understand, the next example, that is budding. When I talk about budding, there is one word related to it that is called as bud. What is bud? Bud simply means an external outgrowth. Now budding takes place in both unicellular organism as well as in multicellular organism. When I talk about unicellular organism, it's very simple, the unicellular fungus, that is none other than yeast. So when we talk about budding, what we need to understand, let us take this to be yeast with the nucleus and all. What happens under conditions when it is unfavorable? This small projection comes out, and this small projection is called as bud. So what will happen now? The nucleus will break and small piece of the nucleus goes in the bud. Now it totally depends on that bud whether to remain attached to the parent body or get detached, and this will also depend on the environmental condition and the factors. If the environmental condition is unfavorable, the bud never get detached from the parent, and once the environmental conditions becomes favorable, they might get detached and start their own new process. The multicellular organism which shows budding, we have one example, that is hydra. Now hydra we all have seen somewhere in phylum Coelenterata. When we talk about hydra, hydra belongs to phylum Coelenterata. Now when you look at the structure of hydra, how exactly it looks like. So we can say this part to be the hypostome or the mouth, this becomes the body of hydra, and hydra shows the presence of tentacles. So at the time of budding, what happens? The body shows some external outgrowth, something like this. Now this external outgrowth which is formed is called as bud. Now this bud will keep on growing on the parent hydra, and as the condition becomes favorable, this hydra or the bud detaches from the parent hydra, attaches itself on the ground and continues as a new hydra. So this is a very simple example for budding. When we talk about next type of asexual reproduction, it is fragmentation. What is fragmentation? Basically, these organisms who are in the form of fragments, they break. They can break due to any reason. If they are in water, like for example Spirogyra. Now this Spirogyra, when it breaks into small pieces, each piece has the capacity to give rise to a new filament and extend as a new Spirogyra. So this is example of fragmentation, but in animals we use the word regeneration. When I talk about regeneration, have you heard about a common example, that is planaria? How planaria reproduces? So when we talk about regeneration in planaria, we need to understand that if this is the planaria, this planaria has two parts. The upper one is the anterior part and the lower one is the posterior part. So what happens here? The anterior part exerts a pressure on the posterior, means they are moving away. So when the anterior and the posterior part of planaria, they are moving in opposite direction, the middle part becomes narrow. When the middle part becomes narrow, it simply breaks. Now we have two pieces of planaria. Now planaria, what it does, the anterior part of the planaria regenerates the posterior part, and the posterior part regenerates the anterior part. It means if I cut the planaria into hundreds of pieces, I can get hundreds of new planaria. So I can say that they are kind of immortal. When we talk about regeneration, have you seen lizard? They often leave their tail behind. Now it is a mechanism to save themselves from any kind of attack. So their tail again regenerates back. Regeneration is shown in case of us also, but it is not to that level like planarias have, where they can redevelop the entire body. For example, our nails, when we cut, it again grows. When we cut a hair, it again grows. But if I remove the nail from the root only, then it is very difficult for it to grow. So regeneration is most important property of all, you can say, maximum of the invertebrates. When I talk about next type of asexual reproduction, it is gamule formation. Now gamule formation has been observed in sponges. When I talk about sponges, it belongs to phylum Porifera. What happens? Sponges are the only animal which cannot move. They are attached to the substratum, they are attached to the base. So they have a specialized cells. These cells are called as archaeocytes. So if I talk about archaeocytes, what exactly happens? When the conditions become unfavorable, these all archaeocytes, they come together, they aggregate and they form a structure. Now this structure is called as gamule. But what exactly happens here, when you look at the archaeocytes which are in the center, basically they are protected. But what about the archaeocytes which are outside? So in order to get protection for this also, there are specialized cells called amoebocytes. What is the role of these amoebocytes? These amoebocytes, what they do, they secrete a calcareous covering around these archaeocytes. In short, the structure becomes somewhat like this. So this is the covering produced by the amoebocyte, and if you can observe, it leaves a small opening. This small opening is called as micropyle. What is the role of the micropyle? Till the time conditions are unfavorable, these archaeocytes, they keep on dividing inside. They are safe because of this amoebocyte secretion of calcareous covering. At the same time, they also secrete or they form special type of spicules. These spicules are called as monoaxon spicules. When I say monoaxon, means they are having only one projections outside. So these all structures together, like the archaeocytes, the spicules, the amoebocyte secretion, together it forms a structure that is called as gamule. And once the conditions become favorable, through that micropyle, one archaeocytes comes out and they grow as a new sponge. What we need to understand, this is again a special type of asexual reproduction that is observed in case of animals. When I talk about gametes, we need to understand gametes are of two types. One is motile gamete, means the one which can move from one place to the other. Definitely they need a medium can be water, and other one is non-motile gametes. When I talk about non-motile, it simply means that they cannot move. Motile gametes, they are called as zoospores. Zoo basically stands for animal, and these animals, they can move from one place to another, therefore the name has been given as zoospore. Where we observe this zoospore or the motile gametes, it is observed in algae. This algae produces motile gamete. Chlamydomonas is one of the example which produces zoospore. When you talk about Chlamydomonas, they are unicellular one. They are having two flagellas. One flagella is short and one flagella is long. Now when I talk about non-motile gametes, it is produced by fungus. To be very much specific, it is conidia. And what makes the conidia? That is penicillium. So it's a type of fungus. Now different gametes, different mechanism, different mode of reproduction. When we talk about asexual reproduction in plants, we don't use the word asexual reproduction. For plants, we use vegetative propagation. So in animals, when we talk about, it is purely asexual reproduction, but in terms of plant, we don't use it. We always say vegetative propagation, means the reproduction which is taking place from any part of the plant except flower. Why? Because flower contains androecium and gynoecium, which is the reproductive unit, the sexual reproductive unit we can say. So if the reproduction takes place from root, stem, leaves, nodes, anywhere except flower, it is asexual reproduction or vegetative propagation. When I talk about vegetative reproduction, we need to understand that vegetative reproduction is of two types. One type of vegetative reproduction is by natural method, where nature is going to operate. So it is the natural method. And other type is artificial method. When I talk about artificial method, it simply means it is by interference of man, where man is going to interfere with the natural process. When I talk about natural methods, we have again root, stem and leaves. So for natural method, we have three different branches. One we call it as root, other one we call it as stem, and third we call it as leaves. But you need to understand one thing. I give you one simple example, bryophyllum. It's a leaf basically. When I take that leaf, I put it in soil or put it in water, new leaflets, they come out. It means that leaf is having a potential to give rise to new plantlet. Agreed? But if I give you a mango leaf now, a leaf taken from mango tree, I put it in soil, will I get a mango tree? Both are leaf, one is bryophyllum leaf and the one is mango tree leaf. Something is there which is present in bryophyllum and it is absent in mango tree leaf. What is that? Whenever we talk about natural method of vegetative propagation, you need to understand certain words. It must come in your answers when you are writing in your exam. Those words are, number one, adventitious buds. Bud itself is a compact cell or part which has the potential to give rise to complete plant. And the next important word, adventitious roots. And in some cases, we must use the word nodes and internodes. In mango tree leaf, there is no adventitious bud. As a result, it cannot give rise to a new plant. But when I talk about bryophyllum leaf, it is having that adventitious bud. So for vegetative propagation, most important part is adventitious buds. Keep this in mind. When I talk about root, we have one common example, that is root tuber. Now when I talk about root tuber, what comes in our mind is Ipomia batatas. When I talk about Ipomia batatas, it is not at all batata. What is Ipomia batatas? It is sweet potato. We also call it as shakarkand. We also call it as chenasu. In different languages, different names. But when you talk about sweet potato, it is one of the example of root tuber. But in root tuber, we have two. One is called as simple tuberous root, and other one we call it as fasciculated tuberous root. Now when I talk about these two names, what exactly they mean? When I talk about simple tuberous root, it means that from the root, only one part of the root swells up to store food and for vegetative propagation. Then it is a simple tuberous root. If I need to draw one Ipomia batata, so let's take this to be the part here. This is the leaf part. Now what is going to happen here? This root will somewhere swell up so as to store food, and this is called a simple tuberous root. Why? Because from single root, only one root is going to swell up, not many root will swell up here. Now this is going to have adventitious roots, and this sweet potato, somewhere they are going to have adventitious buds also. But when I talk about fasciculated tuberous root, you need to understand from the base of the root what happens, many roots swells up. And what is the example for this? We have asparagus, we have dahlia. These are all examples of fasciculated tuberous root. For example, if I take this as the stem part and this all becomes root, so what will happen? They all will swell up so as to store food. So basically it's a type of fasciculated tuberous root. Now moving towards the stem part. When you talk about stem, we have different modifications for stem. Why modification is required? Only for survival, only to adapt to the changing environment. Now stem is something which is adapted in 3 different parts, like there is underground modification of stem. In underground modification, what we have? Rhizome. Rhizome is ginger. When you talk about ginger, when you take a close look at the ginger, it shows certain lines. These lines are basically the nodes, and the space between that lines is internodes. What are these nodes surrounded by? So if I draw one ginger, if I put it in a very simple way, let's take this to be the ginger part. They don't have any fixed shape, so we can draw anyway. And what they have some lines like this. These are basically the nodes, and in between them, whatever space you see, those are internodes. And here what we will be having? All the adventitious roots. Now these nodes, when I break and I put it in soil, what happens? It starts growing. So it is a kind of underground modification of stem, but it is mainly for food storage. When I talk about next, that is stem tuber. When I put the example of stem tuber, what comes in my mind is potato. What is the scientific name for potato? We all have studied in morphology of flowering plant. Potato is also called as Solanum tuberosum. As the name suggests, solanum means swollen up. Tuberosum, it's a type of a tuber which grows inside the soil. So when you talk about the best part of potato, potato plant do not have any root. What is there? There is all only stem and stem. So if I draw one potato plant, let's take this to be the potato part and this all to be the leaf. What happens? Under favorable condition, this plant will develop leaf, and once they do all photosynthesis, they store food, and finally what happens? The tip of the plant swells up in the ground. Now this swollen part, what we can see, is called as potato. And once the conditions become unfavorable, what happens? The leaves, they fall down. They are gone because they cannot afford to lose more amount of water through transpiration or any other mechanism. So what happens? The potato remains inside the soil as it is. So what I will be doing here, I will be taking out one potato to show how this potato exactly looks like. When I talk about potato, let's take this to be the big one, that is the potato. What is here? Can you see this dot and this something like this? This is nothing but the scar of the stem. When I talk about scar of stem, it simply means it is that part which has broken from the stem. Now when you look at the potato, it shows this kind of cuts. These are basically, you can call it as nodes. Now it's the space between them, you can call them as internodes. But around this, they have specialized buds now. These buds are again what we call them as adventitious buds. So let's take it in this way. Now adventitious bud is here, the node. When I talk about them together, it is called as eye of the potato. Now these adventitious buds, on getting favorable condition, what can be the favorable condition? It can be moisture. During rainy season, you all might observe that the potato which we keep normally in the tray, somewhere it starts sprouting. It starts showing whitish part coming out. Why it is coming out? Because these adventitious buds, they are absorbing water from the moisture, and it is giving rise to a new plantlet. So what exactly happens here? This potato, on getting favorable condition, can give rise to a new plantlet. So this is how the stem tuber is somewhere responsible for vegetative propagation, because if I cut this potato into different pieces, you need to take care of only one thing, that each piece must have one eye. And I put it in soil, I sow it in soil, what happens? It gives rise to a new potato plant. So this is how stem tuber is involved in vegetative reproduction by natural method. There are other artificial methods also, like cutting, budding, grafting. So what we need to understand, in this module what we have studied was the purpose of life, goal of life. Second, types of reproduction. along with the definition. Sexual, asexual. One is clone and one is offspring. Then we talked about various types of asexual reproduction in animals, budding, fragmentation, regeneration, and we talked about gametes, the two types of gametes, the motile ones and the non-motile ones. And we covered some part of vegetative propagation, that is the root tuber and the stem tuber. Thank you very much. In this module, we have learnt all organisms are there on earth for a certain period of time. Lifespan does not depend on size of the organism. Reproduction is of two types, sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Gamete formation takes place in sponges. The motile gametes are called as zoospores.